So today we are going to be looking at the histogram in Lightroom. So when you are opening up Lightroom, there is the library module where you can see how all of your photos are organized. But then when you go to the develop module, the histogram is actually the top thing you will see on your develop module if it is open. Sometimes it's collapsed. So sometimes all of these categories here in the develop module are collapsed. But if you want to see all of them, then you press that little right triangle button and you'll see the histogram there. So the histogram is actually very, very simple, but very important for telling us a lot of different information about the photograph. So the first thing to look at is these triangles on the top left and top right here. So those are actually the clipping on the image. So if there is a black point and a white point that makes this little triangle clear here, that means there is a bit of information that is lost in the photo. So that might not be a bad thing. You might want a true black point, true white point. Those are actually really helpful when you're printing photographs to have a true white, a true black point. That's like a really good rule of thumb for sending images for print. When you press the command J, it'll actually pop up and it will show you where that clipping is. So you'll see if you zoom in way in here in the sky, you'll see that the highlights are clipping right there. So if I increase those highlights, you'll see that those red areas get even bigger. For shadows, it shows up as blue. So it's a little bit difficult to see on his suit here, but it is showing up blue as that true black point. So here's the original edit again. So let's also look at what the histogram is showing us about the colors or the color casts and the tones within each section of the histogram here. So you'll notice when you hover, the very, very left is the blacks and then shadows, exposure, that middle block, highlights, and then whites. So if your editing preference, really depends on your preference, is that maybe you like to have slightly cooler images, especially in the highlights, then you would be looking here to see maybe I need to bring down my temp, and you'll see that some blue here starting to pop out in those highlights. It's also really helpful for tint here. So when you go in here and start changing things, you start to notice how the image is affected in all of those different areas. So if you really are aiming for true to life, absolute neutral tones as possible, you don't want to be seeing these extra tints popping their way out of this gray little mountain here. So all of these temp and tint little mountains, I don't know how to explain that better, but the blue showing up here, the magenta, the green, the yellow, those are things that you can correct for. And right now it is pretty neutral, but let's just say it went like that. I drew that temp all the way over here, so it's super, super warm. You'll see how significant the yellow is on the highlight region there, highlights and whites. And then if you bring it all the way back, obviously you can see that the blue is really, really showing its way through those highlights. So showing those extremes really illustrates what it can do and how it can show you when maybe it's not that neutral of an image and it actually is showing you how to correct it, which is really, really nice. So again, it's completely based on your preference. So if you like images to be darker and warmer, you'd want to be seeing some of that yellow pop out. But if you like super cool images, then you'd want to be seeing a bit of blue pop out in those highlights there. Another thing to note, when you are playing with contrast, this histogram is a great illustration of how contrast really affects not only blacks and whites, but color. It really, really affects color. So this is just a warning from your friendly editor. Be careful with contrast because it really changes coloring, it changes blacks and whites, and the histogram really shows that there. So quick summary, the histogram is great for showing us if we have a true black point, a true white point, so that images will print well. And then it also shows us where we need to be correcting the temperature, the tint to match our specific stylistic preferences. If you feel like you don't want to be using the histogram, it does use a lot of power to keep this going, to give us all that information. So if you really want Lightroom to go quickly and you want to be able to go through those images as fast as physically possible, I would just collapse the histogram because then Lightroom won't be working as hard. So I hope that that was helpful. I hope that the histogram is a really great tool for you to see how you need to be correcting your images and that it isn't a confusing part of the Lightroom experience. So feel free to comment below if you have a question about that. Would be happy to answer, and I will see you in the next video.